Hello everyone, Allie here from Allie Olson Sewing Patterns. Welcome to the Highlands Wrap Dress Sewalong. The Highlands Wrap Dress Sewing Pattern is available for purchase at allieolson.com. Today, in part one of the sew along, I'll be talking about all the supplies you'll need to sew the Highlands Wrap Dress, and I'll also show you how to prep your pattern for sewing. That includes block fusing your interfacing and cutting out your pattern pieces. We will finish part one with stay stitching so that in part two we will be ready to start sewing. To sew the Highlands Wrap Dress, you will need the following supplies. Sufficient yardage of mid to lightweight woven fabrics with lots of drape. For this video, I'll be using a 6-ounce rayon linen blend, and you can find out how much fabric you need for your size in the pattern instructions. You'll also need 2 yards of lightweight interfacing. You'll need 1 yard of 1 1/4 inch wide elastic. And you'll need 2 buttons. And you'll need coordinating thread. I recommend you get the bigger spool because we will be doing a lot of top stitching. First, I'll show you how to block fuse your interfacing. Block fusing simply means that you adhere your interfacing to your fabric before you cut out the pattern pieces that require interfacing. This is especially useful if you're working with really lightweight fabrics, and I think it saves time. I've laid my pattern pieces on the fabric to see how big of a block I'll need to fuse, and I've cut that much away from the rest of the fabric. And I'll cut a similar size piece of interfacing. You might have to piece together 2 pieces of interfacing to fill your fabric block if you're working with a narrow interfacing. Then I'm using my iron to fuse the interfacing onto the wrong side of the fabric. And then I'll cut the facings and waistbands out of the fabric, paying attention to the cutting instructions on the pattern pieces. You might notice that I'm cutting my facings on the cross grain, which is totally fine in this stable fabric, but if you're working with really lightweight fabric, you will want to cut your facings on the grain. Be sure to transfer the notches to your pattern pieces with a small 1/4 inch snip into the fabric. Now we'll cut out the rest of our pattern pieces. Again, pay close attention to the pattern markings for cutting instructions and be sure to transfer your notches. Just a side note here, you might notice that my pattern pieces look slightly different than those you're working with. I'm sewing from the D-cut pattern pieces, which are curved at the bottom of the back bodice and top of the back skirt, and I've also made some additional changes to the pattern pieces to achieve the fit I want. And now we'll mark our darts on the back bodice and the front bodices. To do this, I poke a small hole in the paper pattern piece at the dart point and mark that on the wrong side of the fabric. I also snip into the fabric at the bottom of the dart legs, and then I connect these with tailor's chalk on the wrong side of the fabric. I'm also marking the small round circles placed on the back skirt and front bodices on the wrong side of the fabric. The last step for today is to stay stitch around the neckline and armholes with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. This will prevent those areas from getting stretched out as we sew the rest of the dress. Okay, we're ready to start sewing. In part 2 of the sew along, we'll sew the waist ties, the button tabs, and the bodice darts.